Okay, perfect. I think we're pretty much set up right now. Okay. Um,
Thanks.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on, buddy.
No worries, man. I enjoyed the last session last year, so I'll give it a shot.
100%.
And yeah, it was really good.
Well, I know we don't have too many people in the audience right now, but again, these are all being recorded, so we're going to be posting them on YouTube afterwards, and even you'll have a copy of it later, right? Again, the idea is to make sure we're trying to educate as many people as we can from our own experiences, connections, and everything else in between, right? So this is a
Exactly.
very safe space. We're just trying to share information. So there's no right or wrong answers. We're just talking it out, right? So just make sure you feel
No,
comfortable there.
that sounds good.
Perfect. Sounds good. Okay, so here's what I know so far. And again, you can go expand a little bit more, but you're a structural engineer on one hand, but you're also a BCIN designer on the other. So you're both of them put together.
Correct.
Okay, okay. And you've done work in the residential and commercial space?
Yes, I have. Yes, I've done that in the past, but the last year or so, I've been only working on high-rise buildings here in Toronto.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's mainly those and that kind of stuff. But in my previous employment, I've done some residential uh, and commercial using wood, steel, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So when you're saying high rise, I'm assuming anything like 10 stories or higher in Toronto.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, 10 stories. I was part of a team that worked on a three-tower building, 90-story, 87, and 78. So there were six of us on that project. I was one of them. And it went well, still in the development stages, but things are working all right so far.
Okay, that's good to know. It's good to know, so, especially with a lot of our designers on this platform being like more the small residential side, right? A lot of us
Yes.
that I'm sure you've seen some of the past alive from before. We get some people doing custom homes, house additions, small residential projects, mid-level residential projects, right? But nowhere
Correct.
near we had some people come to us about high rise. So it's good to have somebody at your experience kind of join us and kind of explain to us how different that is and how that world type of works, right? Especially from your structural
No.
point of view there, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
100%.
And yeah, I do follow a lot of like the reason why I have my BCIN is prior to getting into structural engineering, I went and I did architecture technology. And in my last year, I was exposed to structural engineering. So it kind of caught my eye. I fell in love. I asked the professor, what can I do to get into this field? So he gave me some tips and I followed that. And here I am. But along the way, I've worked on residential projects, like from custom homes to reno to even a small deck. And that's how I got into wanting to get my BCIN. So I went and I wanted to study the code more and get familiar with the code. I think one of the biggest challenges a lot of engineers face is they're not really exposed to the code as much as they would like to be, especially when it comes down to part nine. They're familiar with part four because they use that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes down to small projects, they they're not as familiar from what I've seen. So that's kind of pushed me to get into that and just work on that as well.
No, 100%.
Yeah,
And it's great that you've explored both different sides of the coin there. Because I personally,
exactly.
I only have the BCIN and I work with plenty of engineers that are just engineers. And you're right. They're
Yes.
very familiar with part four versus part nine. And there's so many, I feel there's a little bit more complications there trying to let them know, hey, by the way, did you check this that it's going
Yeah.
to follow part nine? Like, did you triple check this? And they're either they're inexperienced or they don't know too much about it. And then it creates some sort of delay for the project and everything else involved. At that point, I might as well just do it myself But
Yes.
again, it depends. This is where we have to kind of get both sides to kind of understand both codes, right? Even though the building code's
No,
divided
for
into separate like sections, we have to have an understanding of everything in order to provide the best service out there for our investors and clients.
exactly. And you want to be also like you want to be like paying attention to the budget and the cost. If you engineered everything from part nine, it's kind of a little bit, you know, expensive.
I know. The first thing that's coming up in mind as soon as you said that, steel beams. Anything to do with
Yeah,
steel, our investors just like to avoid it like the plague, right? It's so expensive. We always had this issue with even the contractors that we work with, like steel. Can we try to avoid that as much as possible? Getting LVLs as much as possible,
ex-
right? And
yeah,
this is where
right.
the structural engineer kind of comes in and say what's easiest for them to design a steel beam versus the LVL calculations. I don't like again.
Correct.
I don't know the calculations, so maybe you can explain it to me. But if you're going to do calculations anyways, you might as well do it for LVLs and make the investors happy, so we can continue to work with them versus giving them a hard time and doing steel beam to make your life a little bit easier for one day, right? But again, this is where
For
you come
sure.
in.
Yeah, I think that's the one topic that I wanted to talk about, that client communication,
Mm-hmm.
is because I feel like if you know what the intent is and you know what the end goal is, then it will help you a lot with your design process. And if you get that, you know, I don't know if they're open to a bi-weekly meeting or so on, where you can just discuss things, you know, with the architect, with uh, the GC and that kind of stuff, and you get that feedback. But designing, it also really depends on so many other things that you need to consider. So before you specify a steel or LVL or just a SPF like built up with beam, there's other things that you need to take into account, right? Uh, and that sometimes will impact the design and what you're specifying. So there's so many things that you need to consider. It's not a straight
Mm-hmm.
uh, forward like answer. Yeah.
No, no, 100%. Base, and again, there's going to be different ways that we do this, right? I want to explain to you how we do it, and then we'll compare notes here because I'm very interested to see how you operate in your side as well. So how we sort of operate in my business is that my team goes out, we scan the building, we measure everything, we document everything, from the basement all the
Yeah.
way to the attic space, giving the engineer as much information as possible, developing the drawings to show as much information as possible, dimensions, room, everything, heights that they need to know. Send it off to the engineer,
Yeah.
and then from there, they will determine if it's enough information if they need to go on site or not. 9 out of 10 times,
Yeah.
we give them enough information to design it from the information we're giving them, from pictures, videos, and the drawings. Sometimes they have to go out there on site to triple check something, but 9 out of 10 times they don't. And then from there they'll design their beam work if they need to, right? That's usually how we
Yeah.
go about that, and it's pretty straightforward with a lot of our smaller and mid-level residential projects, right? But I'm interested to know how you do your operations there.
So it really depends. Like for example, I worked on a rental project. They wanted to extend the back of the building or the house, and you had to take into account the headroom space that they have. It's an old house. So that really went back and forth so many times with the layouts and that kind of stuff to make sure we got it right. And using wood helps a lot, right? Because it minimizes a lot of your. You don't introduce another trade to the project, right? If you keep it all in wood. At the same time, you don't have a lot of point loads where you have to provide footings and that kind of stuff, right? So if you use wood, you kind of make it easier on the guys on site. And beside the engineering, you still have to look into that, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges, if you don't have enough information, you're either going to over design it, right? Or you're not going to get the intent of the design, right? So there will always be back and forth. But I feel like if you have good information, good site measurements, the intent, and one of the biggest challenges also is when you're working with renovations, if you don't have the right information about the wall makeup, that can be an issue. So if the wall is not exposed, you don't know what the wall is made of, like your load-bearing walls, and you assume something, but you go on the field and when you start the project, it's something else, then that kind of throws away your design,
No, one hundred
right?
percent. No, I agree. I 100% agree with that because that's the situation we're in a lot of times. A lot of buildings, like personally, I'm doing is investor focused. So we have tenants in there, so we can't just demolish the wall just to see what's how the low bearing is being supported, right? So we
Exactly.
are stuck in like a hard place in a rock type of situation where we have to make our best guess, at least for what we can tell based on the building size and dimensions, and then during the demo phase, and then that's where the contractor will send us pictures and tell us, hey guys, you were wrong, we gotta redesign this
Exactly.
again, right? Which, to me it's happened like maybe a few times, hasn't happened too often. We're usually on the point of that assumption, but at least for building permits, right? Because the idea is to get that building permit to do the demolition, right?
Correct.
What came first, the chicken or the egg type of situation, right? We have to do something.
And I think also what can help sometimes is if you have an understanding of when the house was built, that will give you an idea of what type of construction was used around that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the times it's not just wood. Sometimes they use masonry, right? And sometimes they will use brick, like triple white brick or 8-inch CMU. So if you make an assumption, oh, it's a wood house,
Mm-hmm.
but then it's something else, then it will cause a delay to the project, right? So if you have an understanding when this house was built, you might be able to pick up on the type of construction that was used during that time, so you can make a better like judgment on, you know, the design methodology and where you're gonna go with the design.
Mm-hmm.
But you're once you start uncovering everything, and you open up the walls, then you're gonna be walking into sometimes a surprise, an easy one to fix, you know what I mean? But sometimes you just need that a little bit of communication to know what's happening exactly. Oh, for
No,
sure.
100%, and that's where I appreciate a lot of the vacant buildings that sometimes we do, vacant buildings or even the gutted buildings we're looking to buy ourselves. We can see everything, right? There's no tenant issues. There's no walls. There's no drywall. So we're able to be able to tell from a first glance if we need structural low bearing or any sort of work to be done. But again, that's a really rare case that we get those types of buildings. Majority of the time, they are tenanted. We can't do
Yeah.
anything. So that's where the struggles are, right? Which again, it's just honestly part of the work, right? It's back then when I was doing like custom homes and house additions and the small rental type of thing. Custom homes, of course, is a different story altogether. You don't have to go there. You design it as per. But house additions and major remodels, an owner's living there. An owner's not going to care that you demo apart the ceiling and wall to see if that's a low bearing or not because they're going to do renovations anyways, right? So
Yeah.
that's a totally different ball game than if you're trying to do a small apartment building with like 8 tenants and they're still living in
Yeah.
there, right? You as the owner shouldn't be able to do that, right? You're affecting their lifestyle there, which gets a little
Exactly.
bit tricky, right? So it's just the name of the game there. We can't do that. We have to assume some certain items, and even the city understands
Exactly.
that, right? So they're not really too picky on that part. It's just us as the consultants, engineers, designers need to do our due diligence when we go on site during the demo phase to make sure it is what we assume it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it would be a plus if you have existing working drawings that you can go off of, right?
Yeah.
But most of the time, right, like unless you are the one that did that building in the past and you're gonna do an addition to it or something, then you have some kind of existing plans that you can go off of. But again, that's a luxury that you don't have most of the time.
No,
So
we
yeah.
do not. A lot of cities do not have them. Mississauga, I think they burn their drawings every 7 years or something. Last time I checked, I asked them one time, "Do you have the drawings from even my property in Mississauga?" And they're like, "Anything older than 7 years, they just throw away or something." I don't know why. I don't understand. Maybe they ran out of room at the Mississauga City Hall, but that's what they explained to me one time. In Cambridge, I know we tried to get some files a couple months ago, and they're like they don't carry anything. They really don't have
And
much, right?
yeah.
Luckily, Hamilton, where we do a lot of our business in, does carry a lot of files, so we have a better chance getting files from them. The only problem is
Okay.
timing. It's like another 30 days to get something, right? So
I see.
30 days of doing nothing versus if you've done the drawings, you make some assumptions and make that submission in 30 days, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it really is timing.
No, for sure. And I think that's where, you kind of have to take the risk, right? And then just understand, okay, I'm making these kind of assumptions. So when things are figured out, you have to go back and revise those designs based on the assumptions that you made, right? For the most part, the calculations are the same in terms of how you get the loads on the beam, right? Or the column. It's just the type of material will change, right? Or the type of connection. A lot of the times the connection is one of the biggest issues that you might face, right? If you don't have the proper connection, that will kind of hinder your design.
No, 100%. And honestly, it's not too much of a big deal at the end of the day if we have to go back on site. We just need to make sure that the investors understand that's part of our fees and proposal, right? 'Cause a lot of times, we've had the situation where some engineers would charge extra because they're like, "Oh, I didn't know it was this or that." And again, it doesn't look
Yeah,
good for the investor, it doesn't look good for us, it doesn't look good for anybody that you're going to charge them extra because it's part of your services that you should have been aware of, right? If you
correct.
know right away you can't make 100% guaranteed what that wall is, that's fine. Just make it part of your proposal or quote that, during the demo phase, I'm going to go back on site and triple check that's what it is, right? And
Exactly.
don't scare the investor
Exactly.
with an extra fee. And again, I'm just saying that. Now I get like not to say anything shady about like any structural engineers in particular. I'm just saying the investors don't want to see bill after bill after bill from the same person. They want to see one number and you can do it all. Because that's the number they're going to
Yeah,
run with to do their own calculations on the profit for the building. They hate it when you keep
correct.
adding more little bills in mid like over the course of the project, right? So even for myself,
That is,
it's just one stop shop basically at that point.
no, that's for sure. And I think one of the ways to mitigate that is to be open with the client, right? From the get-go, from the beginning, by letting them know that there might be some changes once you start opening up these walls, and especially with renovations, right? Because you're walking in blind. You don't know exactly everything. So you have to kind of leave a little bit of room, for what if that assumption is not correct. It gives you a little bit of, flexibility to kind of maneuver around and work on that. But if it's a brand new building, then there shouldn't be any issues, right? But with renovations, it's a lot of unknowns sometimes.
No, 100%. And that's why, and this is where even some of my colleagues and I in the design industry here, a lot of them do custom homes, a lot of them do house additions, and we were debating the other night about what's harder to do, custom home or house addition. And 7 out of 10 times they're like house addition is more complicated because you're working with existing conditions, and the cost
Exactly.
may rival that of a custom home because of what you're doing, right? So at that point, you might as well just
And
scrap the whole house into foundation and build from the ground up again.
yes, yes. No, I totally agree. I think renovation projects tend to be a little bit more time consuming and cost a little bit more, especially with unknowns. How do you factor that in to your proposal or to your fee? That's subject to a conversation that you need to have with the client, right? Um, because you still want to be competitive and you want to deliver a great service. But at the same time, there are certain things that you're not going to get the right information until you open up the walls and look at the existing conditions, and then you'll make a better judgment. And I think if you're open with your communication at the beginning and upfront, I think that would help you mitigate some of the issues down the line with what can come up. That's just my 2 cents.
Mm.
I think line of communication, letting them know in the beginning and working, you know, doing your best. I think that would help resolve any issues.
No, it's 100%, and it's just trying to work together with the client and their contractor, right? It's trying to work with both sides because again, the owners may not understand 100% what you're telling them, but this is where the contractor comes in hand, and they try to because the contractor will understand a little bit of the structural engineering work versus the owner, right? If they're a doctor, a lawyer, they're not going to understand what you're saying to them 100% of the time, right? But they do understand it is important. They just don't know how to value it. And I think that's one of the biggest issues in any industry. How do you value somebody's like service at like this level or like this level, right? You don't know 100%. So
You
this is
know,
where education comes it's crucial to any business, right? Or any industry. The more you educate somebody
absolutely.
on how important your service is to their project or to whatever project they might work on in the near future, the more they value it and the less likely you have to kind of sell them on your services or explain to them what you're planning to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they'll appreciate that more too. Yeah, for sure.
Well, as long as you're being completely transparent, right? That's the whole idea, right? If you're telling them, if you're doing like, again, a lot of people are doing seminars, a lot of people are doing in-person events, a lot of people are just trying to explain via phone call, right? As long as you try to spread the word of like how difficult this part of the business is, or some of the speed bumps in your services, or some of the risks that you should be assuming, right? They can kind of understand that point of view and try to value it a little bit higher because I want to pay this guy 10,000 because he's going to solve $100,000 problem, right? And that's the
Exactly.
whole idea we want to
Ex-
get because and I've honestly I've been in the works around a couple of years and I've seen it where some people take advantage of engineers, take advantage of designers, pay them cheap funds or cheap money, and then they get what they paid for, right? But at the same time, it doesn't speak for every designer or every engineer out there, right? They just don't
you know,
understand that just because this guy's cheaper doesn't make him the best, or just because he's cheaper doesn't mean that all designs and engineers are going to be at that level, right? There's a reason why the
no,
guy or the best guy is at a higher rate than the other guys, right?
for sure. For sure. And I think one of the biggest challenges is at the end of the day, your responsibility is to deliver a safe structure, right? So you cannot be, if it's going to
All
take a
right,
long
guys.
time to
Well,
do
first
the
of all,
right
thanks a lot,
thing,
Adrian,
that
Robert,
should take
Neil, for
it should take its
today's
time to do
workshop.
the
So I
right
appreciate you
thing.
guys letting
You know
me
what I mean? You cannot
educate our
be
real estate
saying,
investors on
okay, I'm not
understanding the
getting
permit
paid enough,
processing and how
so
the
I'm just
city
going to do a
operates.
quick job
So my very
and
first
pass
question
it
to
on my
everyone in the
way.
room is:
Um,
has anyone done
because
permits
that will
before?
a
So okay,
not
about
it
half
would
the
be
room.
unethical, but at the same time, uh, your reputation and the profession will suffer because of it, right? Not a lot of people will have a lot of respect for structural engineers. And I think again, like if you are open from the beginning with your intent and the design and what can happen, and the client knows that, so then later down the line, there are no surprises. Um, and I believe that if they are engaged, if you keep them engaged in the project and letting them know what the progress is and what's happening, they will feel much at ease than being kept in the background, just seeing the fee at the end of the day. They'll be like, what am I paying for that I'm not seeing? Right.
Mm.
But if you get them involved, listen, this is what we did, this is what's happening, this is the progress that we've made, and this is the cost, they'll be more willing to accept that than this is the cost you have to pay. That's just my 2 cents, I guess.
No, you're right. It's honestly a very tricky situation, and even the industry, it's not really clear on like who the best one is or who, like how who to really trust. And again, it's a whole trust system there, right? And this is why even working with homeowners back in the past, it's tough to keep building that trust with new people. For instance, like when I was doing
Abs-
custom homes and house additions, you would always have to try to sell yourself on a brand new person you've never met for weeks or months, trying to get that deal, for example, right? Um, versus today when we're dealing with investors, again, I'm not selling them my service. I'm educating them on the process and what needs to be done to solve their problem, right? If they end up using my
Yeah,
service, okay, great, we'll do business together. If not, I'll connect them with somebody else who can help them in their situation, right? Again, at the end of the day, we're trying to
absolutely.
help them understand the process and how difficult it is. Once they understand how difficult that process is or how long that process is, they appreciate the value a little bit more and can trust the work ethics there, right? Again, you're not a salesman. We're not trying to be salesmen. We're trying to give them information, right? And once you build up that trust, eventually in time they'll come back or ask for your help in some certain project one way or another.
Absolutely. And that's how you build your name, right? Like your name alone should be the one that will advertise for you. You're not going to be meeting a lot of people, but that one person that you meet, that one client, might recommend you to other friends just based on the service that you've delivered, right? Uh, and to maintain that relationship is crucial. And how do you do that? You do that from the beginning by being open, by um, educating them on what the project will look like, what the progress is, that is taking place, and hopefully that will build some kind of trust down the line as the project uh, is ongoing.
No, 100%. Okay, so we've tried a little bit about the client side, a little bit of the risk mitigation stuff, right? Let's dive into a little bit of even your services too, right? In terms of the high rise that you're working on, right? Can you explain to us and even the audience how your day to day work life is there? Like, for example, structural engineering, how's that looks like on a high rise building project versus like a small house addition or a custom home, right? How difficult is it? What's the process looking like so we can have a better picture of how much value you can add to the project?
Oh, for sure. When it comes to the high rise side of things, um, obviously most of the condo buildings here in Toronto are reinforced concrete. So you have to really understand how the material of reinforced concrete works in order for you to design a safe building. It's not just the design itself, like you have to constantly meet to do coordinations. So most of the work I do day to day is coordination, and the design aspect of it, it's ongoing. As I do my coordinations, I'm always refining the design. And there are some things that will come up down the line that maybe you didn't catch during the design, right? And you can remedy these things. Coordination with the mechanical team is crucial. It's one of the biggest things. Um, Getting your detailing correct on time, meeting those deadlines is very crucial because you want to keep that project going. One of the biggest uh, challenges when it comes to here in Toronto is a lot of the times you don't get the city comments on time. So when the city comments, usually they will take over a year to get some city comments to get your permit and that kind of stuff. So that kind of puts a little bit of uh, a hiccup to to trying to catch up with the city comments, trying to catch up with the design, that kind of stuff. But overall, uh, it's a lot. I think if I've done up to 24 stories at the moment, but anything uh, like on my own But anything above that, you always work with a senior engineer to get some kind of feedback, especially when it comes down to the lateral analysis and understanding how things are going to go in terms of your shear wall design, your lateral deflections, and that kind of stuff. And a lot of the times, these things are not looked into depth when you do Part 9 buildings. Part 9 buildings, most of the time, they don't even look at the wind design or seismic design. They just care about the gravity design, right? So that's one of the biggest differences that I've seen or noticed.
I see. So if we take like an example in Toronto, because that's where most of your work is, right? Because even my team here is we're looking to do some land developments into like the 60 stories and higher, or sorry, not 60 stories, 60 units, which is like 14 stories, give or take, right? Any advice there when people are doing land developments for, let's say, 10 to 20 stories that you can share? Like, is it best to use reinforced concrete blocks or poured concrete? And then, what type of like exterior finish are we looking at? Any sort of tips there?
In terms of the exterior finishes and that kind of stuff, I'll leave that to the architect. However, if you're looking to, with reinforced concrete, the best thing is your layout is much friendlier, right? If you go with CLT wood, your layout is a little bit in terms of architectural layouts, like how you want to lay out your units and that kind of stuff, how you want to have your gravity walls and shear walls and that kind of stuff. If you go with reinforced concrete, you have a little bit more leeway because you're and the architect will love that because it's a lot easier for them to kind of put their vision into play and they work their magic. Um, if you do wood, it does have its kind of limitations, especially here in Ontario, you cannot do more than 6 stories, right? Um, so anything above 6, if you want to expect, like, you want to get a good layout, you want to get a easy kind of friendly layout that will work with you. I think you can do it with reinforced concrete, and that would help you a lot.
I see. Okay. Because this is what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking out loud here too. And again, just because we're on live together, giving examples helps the community understand like where we're coming from, right? Because you and I can both visualize what the project could be.
Yeah,
So here it is. So like the 60 story or 60 unit I keep bringing up. I'm thinking, yeah, reinforced concrete because we're thinking about underground parking too, which is another topic we can discuss as well, especially with your experience dealing with high rise. I'm assuming a lot of high rise you're working on is dealing with some sort of parking situation like that, underground parking,
absolutely.
right? So that's the only way we can get parking nowadays. So underground parking is what we're thinking. Reinforced concrete all the way up, and then with open web steel joists as a floor system versus I guess wood frame, obviously. But what are your thoughts on that sort of combination there?
If you use open web, I'm guessing you're trying to use a Hampro system. Is that what you're leaning towards?
Like steel, like
So
yeah,
a Hambro system is like it's by Canon, and it's an open web steel joist with about 4 inches of concrete topping,
yeah,
and they're typically spaced every 1500. Um, the challenge with that is a lot of times if you're gonna have a transfer at a floor level, let's say a wall is coming down, but it terminates at that level or a column, right? You need a transfer beam or something, right? So with a Hambro system, you might not be able to get that. You will not be able to get that. Um, but with a reinforced concrete system, you will. The other thing is with the Hambro system, you're going to be taking a lot space under your ceiling. So for your mechanicals and all that kind of stuff. So your floor to floor height will have to be a little bit bigger, higher than reinforced concrete. Typically, the reinforced concrete slab is about 8 inches, right? But if you go with a hammer system, it depends on the spacing that you're gonna lay out your grid. It might be up to 14 inches in depth. So that's quite high if you add to that the mechanical and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to go with a slim and a floor, then reinforced concrete will be a better option.
I see. Okay. Because now that you're saying that out loud, I'm comparing like obviously the steel costs versus the concrete costs, which is again not my expertise, but it is under a topic for discussion, especially with contractors that we know of. Right, concrete is obviously a lot more expensive, but
For
again,
sure.
we would have to run the numbers in that scenario. But no, that's good to know. So the concrete slab. So okay, so typically with a high rise in Toronto, you're building these to be reinforced concrete blocks all the way up as the exterior walls or the foundation walls, and then you're building the floors with reinforced concrete floor slab with 8 to 14 inches thickness. That's what you're talking about.
So typically, your reinforced concrete slab for a residential building, if your grid is up to 6.8 meters, you can do 8 inches of reinforced concrete. If you're gonna do it with a hammer system, which is a different type of system, right? Because you worried about one of the biggest challenges with residential is vibration, right? So if you only use open web steel joist, you're gonna have issues with vibrations. So what they do is they will have the open web steel joist with a hammer system, which is like basically a 4 to 5 inches of concrete topping on top of that, and that will be your floor system.
I see.
But the challenge with a hammer system is if your layout is not as friendly, you will have to maintain those gravity systems and shear walls coming all the way down. Any termination at any level, you will have to introduce a pickup beam or a pickup slab,
Oh,
and
I
that
see.
would be an issue.
Okay.
But with reinforced, that's a lot easier to do.
Okay. Well, that explains some of the buildings I'm seeing being put up. I noticed that they don't have any open web steel joists. I'm just again spinning out ideas into why they do it that way, which sounds like there's a good reason why they don't do open web steel joists. They do the reinforced slab. Okay.
Yeah,
And as
I have worked on a project in my previous experience with a hammer system for a residential project, but the layout was basically a rectangle building and it was typical. So it was a lot easier to put up, right?
oh, I see.
But if the architectural layout will allow you to have an easy setup of a grid line and your walls and your gravity system, your columns and so on and so forth, then it's a lot easier, right? But then you also need to take into account if you're gonna have a commercial space at the ground level, right? You want to have more of an open space. So some of these columns, some of these walls will have to terminate at the floor above, correct?
Mm-hmm.
To have that layout need. So you also have to introduce a pickup slab to take care of that. And then your grid line or your column layout for your parking is also determined by your parking spaces and that kind of stuff.
I see. Okay. Okay, that's making a lot more sense to me now. Okay, perfect. So then, no, it's good. It's good to understand some of the high-rise situations and different methods to building them versus, of course, the mid-rise apartment buildings that we work on. They're not too big. They're like three, 4 stories, right? But it's a totally different ball game than when you're doing like 20 stories there, right?
So
So, no,
yeah,
one hundred
for sure.
percent. Okay, so then my question, part of that whole situation there was the parking, underground parking. Like, what are your thoughts on that, and any sort of things we should be aware of when we're looking into doing that structurally?
I mean, structurally, the biggest challenge with the underground parking nowadays is that the city of Toronto introduced a new bylaw
Oh,
um, at the beginning of this year. So if you are building, and let's say you have 2 levels of underground parking, and you somehow into the water table, right? Then you'll have to use a raft system to kind of and you have to make it watertight. That way you're not discharging into the city uh, underground services, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges. And the reason why this is a challenge, not just from the cost aspect, because you have to waterproof everything, uh, you it's tough to guarantee that all your seals and everything will be watertight, right? It will happen, you can do it, right? But it will just cost you more money, and there's a little bit higher risk when it comes down to that. In terms of the layout for the parking, I think I was speaking to an architect one time. He said the best lot size that you can buy is a 36 by 36 meters, or anything less than 36 meters will not be ideal for a good parking layout, right? Like parking spaces. And typically, you can put your column every 2, 3 parking spaces, and that would help you with a maybe you can get away with a 230 thick slab for your parking, and that's about it.
I see. Okay. Well, it's good to know that there's some sort of rule of thumb. Like 36 meters by 36 meters is quite large, but I think
Yeah,
the property I'm speaking of, I think that might fit it. I'm going to talk to Taco
yeah,
about that, but I think we are at that point if we merge. But again, I'm just speaking out loud for real world examples, right? If it could work, but no, it's good to know 36 by 36 is sort of like the middle ground there.
I, yeah,
Yeah, again, I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm just like trying to use something as a base, right? And again, if we start 36 by 36 and it doesn't work out, I'll definitely update you guys to see if, maybe we have to revise it to 42 by 42, right?
yeah. And that's what he was saying in terms of giving you the best kind of layout for your parking spaces, right? So if it's less, if it's less than 36, then they just have to kind of work the parking layout to make it work.
Yeah.
So, but the most ideal he was saying is at least a 36 by 36 or more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to know. I rather do like wider parking lots versus deeper because I rather like make that the two was it two basement levels to be wider than go an extra floor down, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what that again. I'm just thinking out loud to see if that could work or not. But yeah, no, 100%. I'll definitely take a look at that. The one thing you brought up that was quite interesting was the Toronto introduced that new bylaw earlier this year, right? So I'm assuming a
Yes.
lot of the work from last year aren't going to be applicable to that. It's any new work that's getting done after permits this year.
Correct. So
Okay.
anything after by law will be impacted by that. If you're not, if your water table is low and you're you're above the water table, then it's not an issue, right? There's just you can use your typical strip and pad footings. But if you are into the water table, then you will have to use a raft,
Right.
which is like a pressure. Yeah,
Right. Well, the whole thing is adding more cost to the waterproofing the entire underground parking space. It's going to be tremendous versus
exactly.
last year that we weren't forced to do it. Right.
Yeah.
But it's good to know this is this is why we're bringing you up here, right? To make sure we're educating people on how difficult it is, and of course there's going to be more work for everyone involved, right? So it's good to know, and I appreciate you being transparent about that.
No worries.
Now, in terms of like high rise buildings you're personally working on, right? Like I think you mentioned you've done up to 24 stories, right?
Correct.
How was
Yeah.
that like? Just because I want to touch a little bit on your experience in your projects, the pros, the cons, the what you would never do again, type of thing.
I think, I mean, one of the things that I enjoy this profession, right? Structural engineering. Like I really love it. Um, so I think one of the biggest thing that you need to keep in your mind is communication. And if you know of a problem that doesn't even impact you, right? But it kind of impacts the team, you have to bring it up, right? And like during the team meetings, right? To make everyone aware of it, because if you know it's a problem now, it's going to be a problem when you start construction,
Right.
and you will have to deal with it later, and that will be more of a headache, right? Deal with it when it's in paper before it gets built, right? So I think one of the things is just open line of communications, bring things up, um, do your best to do as much coordination as possible. Uh, keep looking at the drawings, not just your structural drawings, but the other disciplines, architect, mechanical, electrical. Find out where their services are coming from, because you need to know exactly how you're going to deal with that, um, and just provide appropriate detailings and that kind of, like, pay attention to where the generator is going to be, right? Where the electrical room is, and that kind of stuff. So you have an understanding of how you want to deal with that, um, during the design stage. And like I said, just keep, even with your own team, uh, in the firm, like you have to have an open line of communication with your team. When is the due dates? What are the expectations, right? And once you have that outlined and everyone is on the same page, and you just keep track, uh, with the progress and that kind of stuff, and you work through it. It's not a big deal. Yeah.
No, no, 100%. But I think it definitely comes down to the experience there, right? If they sense that you have the confidence in doing the project, then that can definitely go a long way, right? Especially if you have experience doing those types of projects, right? So again, like I brought up in the beginning when we were discussing, right? There's only very few engineers I know that are doing high-rise apartment buildings, right? And you seem to be one of them, which is great because now we can pick the brains of like how that operates, right? And things to look out for. Because the more you educate us and our team and everyone in the community, the easier we can make your work life too. Because if we get to work together, we already understand how your mindset works and what you're looking out for right away. Versus, if you just work with somebody randomly, they don't know you, they don't know what your ethics are, they don't know how you plan your buildings, right? It's all brand new. So it gets a little bit more challenging, right?
For sure. And I mean, one of the biggest challenges is, uh, at least for me, is it's like it will consume time, right, to get the right design and everything. And you have to be willing to also you have to be willing to ask questions. There will come a time when you need to pick somebody else's brain on a concept or something. So never be shy to approach your colleague, your supervisor, your associate, or your partner on that kind of decision. But at the same time, it requires a lot of professional development on your end as well, right? So you have to kind of invest in yourself, learn about the different products, keep improving yourself. And the PO is doing a great thing this year. Well, it started last year, um, which is professional developments have become mandatory. So that's one way of making sure that you're still up with the new kind of materials and techniques and codes, because the codes will be renewed every 5 years, let's say, right? You need to be able to keep yourself on top of that, uh, and just attend work sessions, classes, that kind of stuff. The design aspect, if you love the profession of structural engineering, the design aspect is not the hardest. I think the most difficult aspect is coordinations and keeping a good line of communication, not just with the architect, the mechanical, or the owner, but also with the site guys, the superintendent, the construction, the GC, all those guys, the rebar detailer, right? Because you have to kind of review those shop drawings and look at things and examine them. And hopefully you'll be able to over the years you build enough experience and you will understand where the problem might come from. So you kind of mitigate that problem in advance. And you might not be able to catch everything 100%, but at least you'll be able to do your very best to catch it now before it goes into construction.
No, 100%. And I agree. Like, as much as you're trying to coordinate the people on the, the paper side, the architects, the other engineers involved, it's
Yeah.
very important to have them kind of coordinate with you on site because that's what's going to get actually built, right?
Built,
So
exactly.
the one thing you brought up too, which kind of like piqued my interest there, was the rebar and the shop drawings. Correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong, but I thought that the manufacturers who provide the, let's say, the rail system has their own engineer to use, and then the contractors would contact the manufacturers for those engineer stamp rail systems, like the railing systems for a stairway or
Yeah,
something, right? They wouldn't use
that is
you
cool.
if you're going to be doing the building. Let's say you do a house, but they need manufactured drawings from them. You technically have two engineers on the same project, right?
Yeah, you are required to see the engineer's stamp on the shop drawings, but you also need to look at them to kind of see if you have provided the connections uh, that are going to be used. Do you have the proper structure for it, right? And just get a general understanding of what the connection is going to be, right? And if it's stamped, then you approve that. But a lot of times, if you get shop drawings that are not stamped, you just return them back and ask for a PNG stamp on these shop drawings. Uh, they're very critical because I think if you don't, especially like minor details, like minor design details that um, might come on later with an issue, for example, the using expansion anchors versus adhesive anchors, right? Uh, if you didn't account for that, then it will be an issue. So you just have to kind of pay attention to how is it going to be connected to your structure. That's the main point. Once you figure that out, the rest is up to them.
Oh, I see. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we get to manufacture stamp drawings from them, provide that to someone like
Correct.
you who's doing the rest of the engineering. You compare their general detail to what you're designing or engineering on the house to make sure it's in line with whatever you're designing. If it is,
Because you
great.
have,
Yeah, if it is, it's great. It's good. We're fine. If it's not,
yeah,
you as the engineer will reach out to them to revise their detail to make sure it's in line with yours, or will you revise your detail to make sure it's aligned with theirs? How does that work?
basically, like if we're speaking about railings, right? You need to know where the attachment is going to happen with your structure, right? That attachment, if it makes sense and you've designed for it, then it's good to go. The detailing and the design is up to the engineer that supplies the railing. You just need to make sure that you have accounted for that kind of connection in your structure.
I see. Okay, so it's probably best if I give you the manufacturer specs beforehand, so you know exactly what we're using, so you can design it in
Ex-
that specific way. Okay, I see. I see. Okay, that makes more
That would help a
sense.
lot.
Okay, okay. 'Cause I was just trying to see because my understanding was I thought there was only should be only one engineer per project. Otherwise, it gets a conflict of interest. But at this point, it's not really conflict of interest because they're only reviewing and stamping out for this specific part of the building, and you're reviewing and stamping out for the rest of the other building, right? So it's
Exactly. So
okay.
there's a difference. The engineer of record, the ERO, the engineer of record is the guy who's responsible for the whole building. But the shop drawing engineer, he's responsible for only that specific portion of the design, railing or the precast or the steel portion of the project and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but it's your responsibility to review it to make sure it's proper. Okay.
it makes sense
Yeah.
for sure because it's gonna have to be installed, right? And that's where it comes down to taking that initiative. Even if it's not your job, you still have to kind of look at it and make sure it works. Because at the end of the day, you're working for the client, right? And the client doesn't care if it's whose fault it is. Is just gonna say it wasn't done right. Why is the project being delayed? So if you take that extra time to review it to make sure that it makes sense, and if you are proactive with, you kind of, because there's a lot of communication that happens during the project. The shop drawing engineer might not be, uh, like, he might not be involved until the later stages, right? So you kind of have to share that info with the shop drawing engineer so he knows what you guys have spoken about and what the design intent is.
I see. Okay. Okay. No, that's definitely good to know. 100%. Perfect. Okay. I think we're pretty much at the end mark here. Is there anything else you want to add to this conversation here, or anything that at least the audience and the viewers can kind of understand from your point of view? Because again, we are trying to educate them a little bit more from your profession to make sure they appreciate it and value it as much as like the rest of us do.
No, for sure. I mean, there's nothing much really in terms of just, I think, focusing on risk mitigation is the biggest thing. And there is an inherent risk when you do in structural design, but you need to limit that to as much as you can. So you can deliver a good product and a good structural system. That's about it.
No, 100%. So that's perfect. That's the best way to kind of end things off. It's just, again, educating them and understanding what their project entails, making sure they have a somewhat clear understanding, right? It's not that you want to work as every person to say, yes, 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 man, type of thing. They should have some sort of understanding of what you're planning to do there, which again gets tricky, especially being in the engineering field where they can't really see it too often, right? But again, that's why we're here trying to educate them a little bit more. So, well, I appreciate you coming on tonight, educating us a little bit more on the structural side of high rise, and hopefully we can chat a little bit more later down the road.
No, for sure. Take care and thank you guys for attending and looking forward to other sessions.
Perfect, appreciate it, man. All right, guys, take
Take
care.
care.
Yep, have a good night.
Bye.
All right,
You too. Bye.
bye.